All right. Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Mike Sennello Show. Tonight we are going to go ahead and get ourselves canceled. Why is that? Because we are going to be talking about masks on children. So unfortunately, we may lose this stream midstream. So if you guys are tuning in from Facebook, thanks for tuning in from Facebook. I'm also backing this up on my YouTube channel. I just dropped the link for that. If you're on YouTube and this video mysteriously disappears off of YouTube midstream, do go to Facebook where I've got a simulcast there. The main stream is going to YouTube. But with that note, what we actually have to talk about before we get into our subject of masking and in the classroom, especially as it relates to kids, we are going to do the math, folks. We are going to actually present the data. We're going to doggedly go through this math. So we're going to go way over, and normally we have a much crisper, much more formal presentation to the show. Today, in order to actually do the math in front of you, to show you the information and data you need to make these decisions and to be able to present, for example, to your local boards of education to get them to make these decisions, we're going to run over, and we're going to have to drop the formality here. We're going to have to do this in a fairly informal environment. So with that out of the way, since we are very likely to get yeeted for facts, I'm going to go ahead and share with everybody. This is my Odyssey page. After everything I'm going to be recording. I'm already recording. Once I get it all recorded, I'm going to clean this all up, trim the ends, and upload this to my Odyssey page. This is my Odyssey page at Captain Phoenix. If you guys want to see this in post, then this is the place to go, where I personally know the owner, Jeremy Kaufman, and I'm absolutely certain he will not yeet us for facts. That said, too, as I plug my page here, there's going to be a lot of information that we need to talk about, and that's going to originate on that you can find here on my Odyssey channel. One is going to be this letter to the editor I sent to the Hearst editorial board. It's called Hearst Editorial Board, INCSOC and Their Masquerade, COVID-19 Real Data on Masking in Schools. And this is a letter to the editor that I knew Hearst Media was not going to actually publish because they don't believe in facts. So this is where I backed all of this up, and a lot of what we're going to be doing here was already done in this article. And you'll see it's probably a little bit long for a letter to the editor, but at the same time, you can see all of the sources that I'm citing here in all of this. And what you'll see is things like the NCBI, the Census or Worldometers and Info, which we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the Mayo Clinic. We're going to be looking at things like the U.S. Census. We're going to be looking at the CDC, where a lot of this data is originating from. If you would like a printable format that's a little bit easier to read, and you don't want to read on a computer screen, you can do that here. I've got a PDF version of all of this with footnotes and everything to make it easier for you guys to read. So a lot of this is just in this letter to the editor. So if you guys go to the Odyssey page, that's where that's going to be. The other thing that you'll find is that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today as it relates to the classroom and as it relates to Corona is in this video in the bottom right-hand corner here called Corona Basic Arithmetic. It's on my Odyssey channel, and it's also on my YouTube channel, where if you go to my channel, which is also Captain Phoenix, this is my YouTube channel, you'll see a video that's called, and you search for education on my channel, The Truth About Spending in Public Schools, What Works and What Doesn't, with dozens and dozens and dozens of citations. So with that out of the way, where some of you actually might be coming from is a meme I put together here. We'll get rid of this, and we are doing a display capture, folks, because we have to in order to get this done properly. And yes, so this meme is deliberately inflammatory, and the thumbnail was deliberately inflammatory because if you guys are going to tell me to go screw myself, if the CDC is going to tell me to go screw myself, F you right back. And by the way, this is the whole point of this, because this somehow went viral. The title says, "It's not that inconvenient, just wear the mask." Okay, so because there are so many dumb people, I have to explain what's going on here. This is not my argument. This is not me saying that the fact that you have to wear a mask is equivalent to the Holocaust. No. The fact that you're making the argument that X is inconvenient, just wear X, well then we can, if it's a valid argument, we can plug anything into X as long as it's actually not inconvenient. For example, wearing a patch on your shoulder isn't really that inconvenient. So if you're offended by all of that, well, then stop making that argument. If you agree that that argument is BS, then stop making that argument. There might be reason to wear a mask. By the way, my opinion on that has not changed because the data has not changed. I'm a licensed commercial pesticide operator, so I can't talk about masks all that much, but I've been a licensed commercial pesticide operator for 15 years, which means that and I've been a licensed commercial pesticide operator in multiple states, which means that you have to read mountains and mountains of boring PPE literature. You have to pass exams on the PPE literature. The licensure is the same from state to state in the sense that you have to be incredibly familiar with the PPE. And the fact of the matter is, every government agency, every university, every drop of research has remained identical in terms of the data that they have actually concatenated over the last 15 years. The only thing that's changed was the opinion. And I am of the opinion that those previous 15 years, when the DEC in Massachusetts, the DEP in New York, the DEP in Connecticut, the University of Georgia, the University of Florida, the University of South Carolina, all of their agriculture departments, Florida A&M, University of Tennessee's agriculture department, when Connecticut's UConn School of Agriculture, when their horticulture departments come up with the same thing as the FDA, the CDC, and the EPA when it comes to these masks, when it comes to how they're being used today, there was universal. It wasn't even consensus opinion. It was an absolute universality, universal agreement on how effective they were. And I was in agreement with that opinion for 15 years. That suddenly changed despite no change in the data. So with that out of the way, hopefully we haven't completely lost the streams. So YouTube, Susan, if you're watching and you want to find out what my opinion is, you're going to have to do the research as to what all of those organizations agreed to for 15 straight years and what didn't change and what did change. So with that out of the way, we are going to dive right into our actual bit of research. Folks at home, I'm doing this from the perspective of my hometown here in New Milford, Connecticut. So I'm going to be doing this as a conversation in general about New Milford, Connecticut, which means we're going to be focusing primarily on the data from Connecticut, but we'll take data in from all over the country. Excuse me. So the first thing we need to do is look at outcomes. So one of the things that gets presented to us all the time by our health director, Lisa Morrissey, here in New Milford, and by our own world-renowned, highly decorated epidemiologist, Dr. Jeremy Levin, is data regarding cases. Cases don't tell you anything about outcomes. However, outcomes tell you about outcomes. And the reason that I know that we don't care about cases is because we don't care about HPV. If we cared about cases, what we'd be doing today when it comes to HPV is burning down the entire post-secondary education system, because everybody who goes to some major four-year institution is going to at some point catch HPV. Do you know why we don't care? Do you know why we don't give a damn? Because nobody dies from HPV. So at your next town council meeting, at your next Board of Education meeting, first question that should be asked, why aren't we hearing about deaths? Why aren't we hearing about outcomes? Why are we only hearing about cases? So you guys have come to the right place, because here we are actually going to be talking about cases, and we're going to be pulling out Microsoft Excel, deaths, and we're going to be pulling out Microsoft Excel. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our internet machine. So you guys will have to bear with me as I pull this all up. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into DuckDuckGo, and we're going to type in, plain and simple, let me bring the screen back up for everybody. Plain and simple, COVID deaths by age. And we can go straight to the CDC for this, straight to the CDC, and take them at their own word. There it is. Second thing down, CDC. First link to show up on the CDC. We can go all the way to the bottom, and we can see right here, that's the total deaths. And we got 0 to 17. That's our deaths under 18. So that's the age we care about. 439. 439. So what are we going to do then? We are going to pull up Excel. We're going to pull up Excel, and we're going to start recording this data. So this is deaths by age, all ages, is 658,000, 754. We are now going to go to those deaths, 439. Now, we already probably have our answer here. Should we bother with kids in schools wearing masks? We probably already have our answer here, but let's just, for argument's sake, 0 to 17. 0 to 17. Excuse me as this gets a little boring and science-y here for those of us who actually care about this sort of thing. 439 total deaths. So the first thing we're going to calculate real quick is we're going to divide those 439 by 658,754. And it's so close to 0 that Excel has to round it up. So that's the percentage. Well, we can actually multiply this by 100. Equals this times 100. And that is the percentage of deaths that have been in the ages 0 to 17 this entire time, for this entire COVID nightmare here. So what we can also look at in terms of outcomes is, well, they've got some other things listed here. This, for example, is pneumonia deaths. So 949 deaths from pneumonia versus 439 deaths with COVID. Folks, your children are twice as likely, more than twice as likely to die of pneumonia than they are of COVID. Or, excuse me, with COVID, because that's how we're recording all of this. Okay, so influenza is, this is just influenza, is 188, but we can actually break this down by further age groups, right? So here's the age group of from 1 to 4 years. 54 COVID deaths, 192 to 54. That's almost 4 times as likely to die of pneumonia. And if we just look at common influenza, wow, there are more influenza deaths than there have been deaths with COVID from the ages 1 to 4. And I'm not allowed to tell you what conclusion that obviously should draw you towards for that age group. But there's the actual data. And the link, again, is at the top here. You can see that data.cdc.gov/NCHS/provisional-COVID-19-deaths by sex and age, all hyphenated. Yeah, so you can see all of this working out. So we pulled up our access. So what we can also do is now, since this is from the period of all of 2020 through all of 2021 so far, we can go into, again, DuckDuckGo, and go Wayback Machine. And we can say, there's the Internet Archive. There it is, second thing down. And we can copy and paste this link into our Wayback Machine. And you'll see that a lot of screenshots have been taken of this page. So let's just pull up any random date. Let's pull up June 1st, 2021. Right? Let's do that. Let's see if we can get these same results from June 1st. Taking its sweet time here, I see. Take it its sweet time. Now, again, I have to walk you guys through this because I know what people are going to say, who are the detractors here. They're going to say, oh, well, you just made that up. That's all fake news. Well, no, I'm showing you how to do it right now in Chrome. As soon as this thing decides to load, which is being incredibly frustrating. So this is how we can use the Wayback Machine to get data from, well, while that is loading, and it seems like it actually is loading. Here we go. As soon as it actually decides to load. I guess this was not a completed snapshot. So let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of that and see if that actually pulls up the proper page. I see. So we do actually have to include the gibberish at the end. So let's see if we can't find another date then. It would not be an episode of the Mike Sennello Show without technical difficulties, folks. I wonder what is going on here. So we're copying and pasting this link into the Wayback Machine. It worked. Wayback Machine. It worked 2 seconds ago. It worked 2 seconds ago, folks. Like I said, it wouldn't be an episode of the Mike Sennello Show if not. Here we go. All right, so we're back. We're back. Let's see if we can't get this. Let's do July 1 then. Let's do July 1. All right, and while that's loading, because it's going to take a long time, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look up population data from the Census Bureau. Now, I remember that I showed you guys where I'm getting a lot of this from, and we're actually going to get that from that article I showed you. So, what do we need? We need some data from the U.S. Census. So let me pull up the link for that so we can get the population here since that's taking forever, let's just do U.S. population by age, 2020 census. Here is the U.S. Census Bureau. Percentage of population 18 and over by state. So we can do the inverse of that to get to Connecticut. And we get to Connecticut, it is 77.9%, which means that there's 22.1% of the population is under 18. So in Connecticut, percent population under 18 is 0.221. So 22.1% of the Connecticut population is under 18. Okay. So let's get the total population of the United States. 2020 census population by state. State profiles 2020. Let's go to Connecticut. So here's the total population in 2020, 3,605,944. Total population. 3,605,944. Okay. All right, so we know that population here in Connecticut. So let's do 2020 U.S. population census population. And we're going to go straight from the Census Bureau. 2020 census results. So let's do the reapportionment results. Perhaps they will at least tell us the total population. 2020, okay. All right, we're going to just go to my article then, and we're going to click on the links in that article for the census information. Okay, so let's see. We got to have, here we go. This is the link we want for population by age, which has apparently expired in the last month, which is wonderful. Again, it would not be an episode of the Mike Sennello Show without, of course, without some technical difficulties. Okay, so why is this so difficult to find the total U.S. population? Because we don't want to go to Wikipedia. We want to just go straight to the census government, the U.S. Census. So fine, we'll just do the Wikipedia. U.S. population by age, 2020 census. Age and sex tables. Here we go. Oh, that's based on household income. Okay, no, I just want the numerical values. Demographic analysis estimates. Here we go. And again, we don't actually get the age breakup. So we're just going to cheat. We're going to go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia United States. Wikipedia United States. All right, fine. So we're going to go to our population. our population, which is 331 million. And we're going to go to the link. There, U.S. Bureau. Of course, it's not found. Of course, it's not found. Let's do this. No. All right. So anyways, apparently the U.S. Census Bureau no longer has its actual 2020 population numbers up. So we're going to just do this. Copy and paste that. That's the total U.S. population. Total U.S. population. We'll see why we need this in just a moment. Total U.S. population. Is. All right, so we got to change our formatting so you guys can actually read this. Format cells. We're going to go, okay, so we want to make this size 20. We're going to make it bold so you guys can see that. 331,449,281. Now let's see if this thing actually loaded properly. Of course it did not. Of course it did not. Okay. So we're going to have to do this the really hard way because none of these sites are actually including all of the data that was there a week ago. So who's surprised by any of this, by the way? So what we can do... is what else do we need? We need to know we got the population of Connecticut. We got the percentage population of Connecticut under 18. What we can do is on the Wikipedia page, we can go to 2019 estimate of their population by age. So that would be under demographics, population. Population. All right. U.S. population under 18. We can do that. Adult and under age 18% population. Oh, we don't have the population percent population for the U.S. Here we go. 77.9. So 22.1%. So in U.S. population under 18 is 0.221. Is that true? Is that true of Connecticut here? $79.6. So it's 20.4% for Connecticut. That's our correct answer here. 0.204. Okay. So now we're going to run through this data real quick. It's not going to take long. Trust me. I know it took us a while to find this because these links update on like an hourly basis, and I know there's a deliberate effort to bury this sort of thing. So now we have our populations by age, and we can, from here, actually do some calculations. So what percentage of those deaths, of the COVID deaths, happened under age 18? We have that percentage. What we can now do is say, what is the likelihood? So that's happened over the course of, that's happened over the course of 365 days, plus all of the days up until September 19th. Right? We have the provisional COVID deaths by age. And I was hoping to use the Wayback Machine to get a breakdown of these age groups, say, a few months ago, so we could see what that was over the last 3 months and get a more up-to-date amount of time here. So that's as of 9/11. Okay. So that's 365 days plus 9 months and 11 plus 8 months and 11 days. So if a month is about 30 and a half days, so a month is 30 and a half days times 8 months times 8 months plus another 11 days. So roughly 255 days through the year. So this plus those 365 equals this plus 365. That's how many days? Days of COVID. Days of COVID, right? That was our 15 days to slow the spread here. It's now become 620 days. So if we take those deaths and divide by the number of days, so deaths per day, we get So this equals 439 divided by 620. Okay, so we're at 0.7 deaths per day. So let's annualize those deaths. Equals this times 365. So we're up to about 258 deaths per day, deaths per year. So this is deaths per year. Okay. Under 18. What is that? So what does that annualize to? So we need to know the population that is under 18. So U.S. population under 18 is 0.221. So that's 22.1% of the total U.S. population. So that is equals this times this. Bam. We've got too big a value. Equals this times this. What is it? The commas that are doing it? Equals 0.221 times 331,449,281. There we go. So that's 73 million people in that age group. All right, so the annualized death rate then is 258 divided by 73 million, which is a tiny, tiny number. Now, normally when we do risk calculations, when it comes to deaths and outcomes such as this, the thing we compare this to is a risk calculation per 100,000. So let's multiply this. Let's multiply this by 100,000. 100, 1, 2, 3. Bam, 100,000. So 0.35 deaths per year. So this is deaths per 100,000 per year. So this is annualized risk. Annualized risk is 0.35 per 100,000. Now there's a reason I did this. And that is because we can actually go back to that document that I showed you guys before, and we can look up some things that we can compare this to. So, for example, what is the likelihood that you are going to die by merely falling down? So, we can open up our new window, go into DuckDuckGo. Here is an interesting website that uses data from the CDC. That's its original source in this. So we can look at the falls. This is the likelihood that you're going to die by falling per 100,000. We can see it up here, death rate per 100,000. Connecticut, 8.7. What's the U.S.? What is the U.S. average? What is the U.S. average? I don't see the U.S. average. I don't see the U.S. average, but we can get an idea with Connecticut. So we can do the same thing that we just did with the U.S. risk of death with Connecticut. So in Connecticut, we have the population that is under 18 is equal to this times this. So we are 735,000 people in Connecticut. Okay, so what we have to do then is look up the COVID deaths by state. Right? We can do that. COVID deaths by state. That's Statistica. Let's see if we can get one from the CDC itself. Okay, so this is going to be completely impossible to read. Completely and utterly impossible to read. So let's do this then. Corona days. Okay, so what we're going to do then is we're going to go to Worldometers. Worldometers. And that's going to get, this is concatenated by Johns Hopkins University using data from the CDC. We'll order list it by state. We'll go to the U.S. We'll go to Connecticut. Total deaths, 8,447. All right. So we can actually get more specific than that. But let's say there are 8,000 deaths in Connecticut. 8,447 deaths in Connecticut. Deaths in CT with COVID. All right. We also know that, generally speaking, over that same time period, that many kids have died. That's how much should be accounted for in that age group, 0 to 17. Now, we can get more specific than that, but let's use the assumption values we have here in front of us. So that would project 5.6 kids under 18 have died in Connecticut. That's what that projects, okay? So we can annualize that. So what we do is we divide by this, divided by 620. So that's how many you'd get per day. And then we can multiply this by 365. And we can get to an annualized death prediction of about 3. About 3 for an entire year. How many people under 18 live in Connecticut? Well, we determined that 735,000. So we're going to take this and we're going to divide by 735,000. And we're going to come up with yet another tiny number. Okay, so this has to be multiplied by 100,000 to get to 0.45. So it's a little bit higher here in Connecticut than it is across the country. I would imagine that number has changed dramatically in recent times. So let me get to, those are our provisional data. Okay, so we're unfortunately going to have to deal with just that time period over that breakdown of deaths here in Connecticut. So that's our annualized risk. So what we can do again is we can go back to where we had everything broken down by state. For crying out loud. So let's do likelihood of death by falling by state. There we go. All right, so we're back to likelihood of death by falling by state. Here in Connecticut, so you're almost 20 times as likely to die just by falling as your kid is of dying of COVID. Let's do something else. Let's do something totally ridiculous. Let's do homicide. Let's do homicide. Are you more likely to be murdered in Connecticut? Yes, you are you are 9 times more likely to be murdered in Connecticut than your kid is of dying of COVID. Let's take something like, suicide you can actually control. Let's take poisonings. Connecticut. 34. So what does that work out to? You are almost 10 times as likely to die of poisoning than your kid is of dying of COVID. Let's go to drownings. Here in Connecticut, where are we? We are at 0.7. You are almost twice as likely to die of drowning as your kid is of dying of COVID. And this all doesn't take into account things like vaccination rates here in Connecticut. Right. So what else can we add to this? Let's find out how likely it is. Odds of being struck by lightning. We can probably go to the CDC, lightning strike victim data, around 1 in 500,000. Okay, so according to the CDC, that's 1 in 500,000. So what we can do then is we can take equals 1 divided by this. So this is the inverse of that. And that tells you that those kids here in Connecticut have a 1 in 221,000 chance of dying of COVID, which is only barely less than half. But we could do actually some more research on this. So we can actually take more up-to-date statistics on this by going back to these COVID deaths. So if we do this, and this is going to be really tough, we're going to have to do this a really hard way by zooming in as far as we can. And let's make these graphs really big. Okay, so this is daily deaths. September 16th, 31. 31 plus 22 is 53. 53 plus 39 is 92. 25 plus 92 is 112, 117. That makes that 140. 151. 154. 161, 165, 168. Now we can go back to June. 171, 172, 174, 177, 184, So that's 190 deaths in Connecticut. All right. So since June 1st, 190 deaths in Connecticut. How many days has there been in June? Well, there was 30 days in June. There was 31 days in July. There were 31 days in August. And this is up to date as of today. So 19 days in September. So we can do equals sum. There. So in 111 days. So 190 deaths in 111 days. Okay. So how many of those would you expect to be children? Well, if that percentage is the same, we can say equals this percentage times the total number of deaths. Okay, so that's how many deaths over that same period you'd expect to have been children. And that's over 111 days. So let's get this to the day. So this is that number of deaths divided by the number of days. That's how many deaths per day. We can take this and multiply by 365. That's how many deaths per year out of that age group, 735,000. So now we can say, what is the risk of death over that time period? And that's another really small number, so we got to multiply this by 100,000. So now we're at 0.056. Okay, so now we're at a number that's almost a tenth of what we were talking about before. So let's get the inverse of your risk calculation equals 1 divided by this number. So now we have our real odds. So let's format this cell real quick so we can actually see what we're talking about here. Number, we want to use the thousand separator. So we should probably be doing some sig figs, which means we would only do 3 significant figures here. So that would be 1 in 1.77 million. All right. Now, what did we say about the risk of getting struck by lightning? Here's our, we got risk of death by falling. Look up risk, odds of being struck by lightning. And we can go into lightning strike victim. Again, 1 in 500,000. So what is this equals this divided by 500, 1, 2, 3. Okay. That means since June 1st of this year, here in Connecticut, you would project that your kids are 3.5 times more likely to be struck by lightning than dying of COVID. Now, there are some mitigating factors here, and there are some things that we have to take under consideration. First things first, what we're doing is a risk calculation. Anytime you do any risk calculation, period, there's no such thing as zero risk. This is built into the definition of risk. We are never going to get that down to zero. So that isn't to dismiss what does that work out? What was it? 439 deaths. That's to say that there is always going to be a risk of death by basically anything. So that number is never going to be a permanent zero in terms of a risk calculation. What is the odds of the thing coming up? It's always 1 in something. It cannot be 0 in something. It's 1 in a number, and that number needs to be a positive integer. Well, it doesn't need to be a positive integer. It needs to be a positive number, and that number obviously has to be greater than 1 because there is no such thing as less than 1 incidence, less than 1 thing into which you're going to divide it into. So risk calculations cannot possibly result in zero risk. So if the standard is zero risk, then there's a video on my channel right now called Impossible Standards. You've established an impossible standard, which is an element of obvious bad faith. So whenever you're doing this risk calculation, you have to do these risk calculations, understanding that there's no such thing as zero risk. Understanding that, no, we're not dismissing those 439 deaths. We're saying that those 439 deaths represent an insanely low risk of death by COVID. And the reason, by the way, we choose death, there's a reason we choose death as an outcome. There's multiple reasons we choose death as our outcome metric, right? And that is because number one, it's a binary. There's no such, you're either dead or you're alive. You can't be both. You can't be Schrodinger's cat. You're a human being, not a subatomic particle subject to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You're either dead or you're alive. So there's no mistaking what we're talking about here. If we're talking about, say, a broken bone, well, how badly is it broken? Where is it broken? Which bone is broken? What direction is it broken? How many times is it broken? Whose bone has broken? Because a broken hip on a 6-year-old is a lot different, is very different from a broken hip on a 96-year-old. So that's one of the huge reasons we use death. There's no confusion as to what we're talking about when we're talking about death. It's also a goalpost. There's nothing in statistics, from a statistical standpoint, worse than death. There's no thing to consider beyond that. The other thing is that all of those things that go from nothing to death tend to scale with death. So if your odds of having an outcome here versus death, right? So if it's about halfway between nothing and death, if that's where that that likelihood outcome comes into play, then it's always going to be, it's going to scale. It's going to, generally speaking, very, very generally speaking, scale with death. So in the case of a broken bone, one of those things that could happen as a result of the broken bone, what are your odds? Let's say getting into a car crash. What are your odds of having a broken bone? What are your odds of dying in a car crash? Well, the odds of dying in a car crash are probably less than the odds of breaking a bone, because if you break your neck, you're probably also going to die. So in that case, you're much more likely to break a bone. But let's say you're twice as likely to break a bone as you are to die. If the likelihood of you dying, let's say because we're now adding in that you don't wear a seatbelt, the likelihood of you dying doubles, then so generally speaking will the likelihood of you breaking a wrist. So that is why we use death as our primary metric when we do these sort of things. The other thing you have to do anytime you do a risk calculation is consider competing interests. So in this case, we know what the likelihood is of you dying with COVID in those age groups over this entire time frame. And we know what the likelihood is here in Connecticut if we annualize the last, say, 3.5 months, because the information that we have that we can glean from the last 3.5 months is significantly more important than the information we can glean from a year and a half ago, right? The world we live in today is not the world we live in a year and a half ago when it comes to these sort of things. We do have vaccines, and if they work, then things should be a lot different for kids, and that's what you would predict. And if you actually go to the tables themselves and download all the Excel spreadsheets from the CDC, what you'll find is that, in fact, over the last 3 months, deaths under 18 have gone way down with COVID. But we do talk about competing interests. So what is the risk of, say, you dying because you were wearing a seatbelt? What is the risk of you dying because you weren't wearing a seatbelt? So we always have something to compare that against, right? What is the risk of you dying because you were drowning, right? Your car flipped over a bridge, and because of those extra moments that you had to spend getting your seatbelt undone, you had a tough time getting it undone, and then you also have to break your window because you're not going to be able to open the door. What if that's why you wound up drowning? So the odds of that are, I would assume in that situation, it would be safer to wear the seatbelt than not. But hey, that's your decision, right? I'm not the one going through the windshield. That's your choice, right? So we always have to consider competing interests. Write that down. Competing interests. One of the competing interests we have, of course, is in early childhood development, how unbelievably important it is that children be able to see faces, that children be able to learn not only facial expressions, but how to articulate speech. And I'm just going to briefly bring up here some bits of research that you guys can make use of yourself at home. This is from plos.org. This is a medical science. It says basically the short version is that kids have got to learn how to use facial expressions. This is published February 11th, 2020. And what it's showing is, as it relates to this is for infectivity. Sorry, that's another conversation that we'll have to bring up a different time. Let's do, here we go. Okay, so this is from the NCBI, and it talks about how kids have got to learn have got to see faces in order to learn the facial motion recognition. And we've got another article here that goes into the same information. And what we can actually just do is just scroll right down to their images. And what we can nicely do, what they've given us the opportunity to do, well, what they did before was to extract this image. And here it is. Here's this image right here. So what we've got is, this is a face with a mask on. This is a face with the mask off. We can all pretty well tell that that's happy, right? In fact, this is such a pain that we're going to just use the original document here. So on the right, we've got sad. What we've found, what you can see right away, toddlers do not succeed in telling what the facial expression is when the mask is on. Children, they're getting okay, and adults can kind of figure it out. Now we've got this to compare to. Again, your toddlers are half as likely to get it right without the mask as they are with the mask as they are without it. And children are, in this case, about 3/4 as likely. Yeah, so there's a huge disparity. Now, that said, these are like the two easiest facial expressions you'll ever see in order to get, if we're talking about comparing facial expressions. So let's pull up a facial expression that's a little less, it's a little bit more difficult to figure out. So you guys, tell me what this facial expression is. This is a famous meme. This is a world famous meme that went around. What is her facial expression right now? Adults, can you tell me what that is? Okay, so now we're going to take off the mask, and now we're going to make it painfully obvious. What's this? This is the not impressed meme. Everybody knows what it is when they see that face. We know exactly what Michaela Maroney is trying to convey, or at least having a difficulty avoiding conveying in this case. And again, if we put the mask back on, how many kids are going to get this right? How many kids are going to get this right? And by the way, this is just for social emotional learning. This is just for social emotional learning. So one of the other things that the previous study that I showed you guys showed, I think it was this one. Yeah, is that children, it mentions that, I actually don't know if this is the one that's correct, but one of the things that we also know too is that children, especially younger children, have got to learn how to articulate certain elements of speech, especially if they're learning English for the first time, if their English is a second language. They need to be able to see the motions of the mouth in order to actually properly learn the language, in order to properly overcome certain speech impediments, which are much easier to overcome when you're 5 than when you're 25. So when you're able to see people's mouths, yeah, I mean, that's a serious consideration taken into effect here. Now, it's true that children under 12 can't get vaccinated, but the competing interest here isn't being vaccinated versus not. It's the competing interest of being able to have a child see the face. And if your response is just going to be this no limiting principle, zero risk sort of thing, then what you should be doing is having your kids masked in the home. You should be masked in the home. If you're seriously worried about your kid who can't get vaccinated spreading the disease to you, then your 2-year-old, when you're bathing them, should be wearing the mask. That's hence the waterboarding picture in this thumbnail. You should be waterboarding your 2-year-old because that's the only thing that's going to prevent you from getting COVID from these. Now, obviously, the competing interest of waterboarding your child is what's preventing you from from forcing you to wear your child in the bathtub while you're bathing them, their 2-year-old. Like, that's an obvious competing interest that we're going to be that everyone takes into consideration. That we know the side that says mask children everywhere. We know that's a crock because we know you're not waterboarding your 2-year-old when they take a bath. So the last thing that we have to talk about here is, so we might have the complaints. We might have the complaints about, say, well, what happens when the teachers? How about the teachers? The teachers could get COVID from the kids, and it's true that the likelihood of death basically perfectly scales with age. Now, that risk factor doesn't really get significant until you get pretty high up in age. But let's say that the teachers are people that need to be considered. My first reaction to that, of course, is if the vaccines work and everyone can get one, then go get vaccinated, and then you're fine. If they don't work, then you've just convinced people to not go get vaccinated. So if you're actually trying to get people to get vaccinated, the obvious response is then you should tell the teachers that are complaining about potentially catching COVID from their kids to just get vaccinated or shut the hell up. Shut the hell up, and that's where we are right now. So the other consideration to be had is that we're here in Connecticut, we have a very, very, very high vaccination rate. And again, if we're going to assume that they actually work, they should be working as a competing interest with the masks for children, right? So if we're going to say vaccination rates by state. Okay. And that, by the way, this is going to get into a larger conversation. Okay. So we can go to Connecticut. Almost 70, just basically 75% has received one dose. 67% has received both doses. Okay, now we go back to our Excel spreadsheet. What percentage of the population is under 18? 20%. 20%. Until I think it was a month and a half ago, if you were under 18, you could not get vaccinated. So what does that say about the people who aren't vaccinated? They're kids. They're kids. In fact, we can dive deeper into this if you want to. Right? And I actually don't know how to get that information because apparently it was available on the CDC's website as of 5 minutes ago, but isn't available right now. So, we need to go back into, so if we take that 20%, right, so we can go into COVID states, vaccination rates. Connecticut, 75%. 75% plus 20% is 95%. So, there is a lie going on right now. And I have this on my channel. I broke down the data in a meme. The data does not indicate that the people not getting vaccinated aren't, anti-vaxxers or whatever. What they are children. Children account for the overwhelming majority of, at least the majority here in Connecticut. At the very least, the majority of people who are not vaccinated in this state. So I would suggest that I would suggest that if we're forcing kids to wear masks in the classroom because of some serious concern over the spread of COVID-19 to the teachers, what you've just told everybody is that the vaccines don't work. Because let's not be naive. What percentage of teachers in Connecticut are not vaccinated? Honestly, here in New Milford, we're familiar with the teachers. This is a town where everyone knows everyone. I would be blown away if there were any more than 2 teachers who haven't been vaccinated. So that says to me that, as the data has been suggesting for months now, that schools are not going to continue, that are going to continue to not being a primary vector of transmission. Now, as far as I don't know why this is acting up like this. Okay, so we did bring up a study, and I guess I'll have to bring this back up here. We did bring up a study on why it is that children don't seem to transmit it as much. Now, according to our own Dr. Jeremy Levin, who said on November 23rd, 2020, and by the way, this is at the town council meeting from November 23rd, 2020, go to YouTube, search for Town of New Milford. Our channel is on there. Go to the November 23rd, 2020 town council meeting at timestamp 2724. Dr. Jeremy Levin said, the kids seem to be far less infective than the teachers. Do the same for the December 14th, 2020. Do I have that right? Yeah, December 14th, 2020 town council meeting. Go to the timestamp, 40 minutes, 43 seconds. Dr. Jeremy Levin, world-renowned epidemiologist. The better thing is that kids don't seem to be suffering anything like the depredations people of my age have. Okay. The other thing is that he also just said most recently that all of the children who have died with COVID, all of them had, quote, major complications. All 439. Now, at the time, it was just under 400. But the point is, all of them had major complications. And when they're major complications, they're usually pretty quick. So the rapid emergence and subsequent global dissemination of COVID-19 has resulted in over 4 million cases. Where the disease has a marked predilection for adults, and children are relatively spared. Understanding the age-based differences in pathophysiological pathways and processes relevant to the onset and progression of the disease, both in clinical courses and experimental disease models, may hold the key to the identification of therapeutic targets. The difference in the clinical courses are highlighted by the lack of progress of the SARS-CoV-19 beyond mild symptoms in a majority of children, whereas in adults, these diseases progresses to acute lung injury and acute respiratory disease syndrome, ARDS-like phenotype with high mortality. So what does that tell you? All of these quote-unquote long haulers account children are much, much, much less likely to fit into that group. Okay, so but why is that the case? The pathophysiological mechanisms leading to decreased lung injury in children may involve the decreased expression of the mediators necessary for viral entry into the respiratory epithelium and differences in the immune system response in children, specifically a decreased expression of proteins, including, I can't pronounce that, ACE2, and I can't pronounce that either, TMPRSS2, in the airway epithelium in children may prevent viral entry. This is something, again, our own Dr. Jeremy Levin alluded to months ago. And we have another, of course, we have another study that says basically the same thing here. It talks about why it is that children are just naturally built to be less susceptible to estimate the relative susceptibility and infectivity of children. Children are less susceptible to the detriments of COVID-19 than adults. And again, this is something that Dr. Jeremy Levin has alluded to in the past. So this is what I wrote. This is what I wrote in my article. According to findings published in the American Journal of Physiology, Lung, Cellular, and Molecular Physiology, children produce much less, so I haven't been showing you this window capture. Awesome. So that's the second study that we talked about. And that is the first study we talked about. So you guys can follow those links up here if you want to. You guys are going to have to basically freeze frame. I don't have time to put them into the conversation here. So basically what they're saying is that, basically what they're saying is what I wrote in my article. According to findings published in the American Journal of Physiology, Lung, Cellular, and Molecular Physiology, children produce much less of the protein ACE2, which seems to be used by the SARS-CoV-2 virus to infect cells. This is something our own Dr. Jeremy Levin has alluded to when it comes to young children and is part of the ongoing speculation in the scientific community as to why children seem to be less encumbered by the disease and as to why they tend not to catch and spread the disease at nearly the rate that adults do. The massive uptick in production of this protein during puberty would add to the speculation as to why children of prepubescent age don't catch the disease, transmit the disease, or are affected by the disease at nearly the rate of even young adults. And the onset of puberty is something, again, our own Dr. Jeremy Levin has speculated as being the link between these factors. Now, again, you can go ahead and read these studies. This is what these studies are saying. You're welcome to read them. I did. They're incredibly boring, so that's why I'm just summarizing them for you, and they're really sciencey, but at the same time, you're welcome to check both of these studies out. They say basically the same thing. There is a real biological reason that children just aren't seeing the outcomes that we're seeing from adults, and again, it is affecting, the rationale for that has an element of transmission to that. That's why they're not testing positive at the positivity rates that adults are. That's why, especially when it comes to young children. The short version is the kids are going to be fine. But we kind of knew this all along. So now you have the information, now you have the data in your hands. So next time that these conversations are brought up, go to the research, go to the CDC and use this data against them if that's how it's going to be the case. I'm not going to tell you what you should think, but what it seems to me is that we have a competing interest, which is that kids have got to see faces. They've got to see faces in these, especially social emotional learning settings, which they're only getting in the classroom, right? Like, it stinks that in America we've treated the classroom as just government-funded daycare. But hey, that's what it is. That's what the reality is on the ground. So the next time we have a Board of Education meeting, guys, go to these Board of Ed meetings. Go to these Board of Ed meetings and say, listen, kids are going to be fine. Here's the raw data: 439 kids out of 73 million. We're looking at an annualized risk calculation of 0.3 out of 100,000. We're looking at, if we're using more recent data and specifying Connecticut, we're looking at kids being 3.5 times more likely to be struck by lightning than succumbing to COVID. I don't know what better case you could build towards not wearing masks in the classroom, especially for young kids. And even 12 to 18, if you're really, I don't see how this risk calculation is any different from that age group. But if you want your kids to not have to, if you're really that concerned about it, you can make your 13-year-old go get vaccinated. You can do that. And by the way, like I said, I showed you guys the people who aren't vaccinated in this state. They're not some crazy Republicans. They're not crazy anti-vaxxers. They're kids. And the kids are going to be fine. So I think you guys can figure out a conclusion. I think you guys can come to your own conclusions as to what to do with that information. Are we done with COVID? I can't say. I'm not allowed to say because we're on YouTube and we're on Facebook and we are subject to their hostilities. So I said we would do Q&A at the end. Let's see if anyone's chirped in. Let's see if anyone said anything. Ricardo, thanks for joining in. Facebook is going to shut you down for presenting the actual math. Hearst Media is a propaganda tool for the left of Connecticut. Yes, I called them that in that article. So go ahead and check out that article. They always talk about cases, but how many tests it took to get to the number. 17 cases out of 500 tests. Very true. This is why cases don't tell you anything. This is why when we go to town council meetings, anyone who goes, please ask for outcomes. Ask for that because we care about outcomes. We don't care about cases. I honestly, there could be 7.5 billion cases right now. If nobody's dying of it, if there's no adverse outcomes to come from that, then what are we concerned with here? I'm actually going to move my camera just a little bit so I can get, that's probably closer to where I want to be. Yeah. It's been nice knowing you, sir. I'll remember the good times and laughs we gave us. You should also do just New Milford. Yeah. So Ricardo, I love to do that. Let me see if I can actually bring that up because I had this up yesterday. Deaths by town. So COVID deaths by town, Connecticut. Yeah, so let's see. This is from the state of Connecticut. Okay, so let's do view data. Okay, so we actually can do this. We can do this specific to New Milford. Richie, if you're still listening, I think we can do this specific to New Milford. All right, so let me see if I can get this by town and by age. COVID deaths by town and age. COVID-19 confirmed cases and deaths by age, Connecticut. Let's see if we can get this to happen. Okay, so for whatever reason, Connecticut is not bringing it up the way the CDC presents it. So we have 0 to 19. So we have a total of, oh my God. Date updated 4/14/20. So I don't know how useful that's going to be, but that says a total of, in the age groups of 0 to 19 in Connecticut, 1 death. 1 death. Now, this is from Health and Human Services from the state of Connecticut. I wonder if we can get a more recent. Anyways, while I'm looking that up, let's see what's going on over at YouTube. You have to bear with me here, folks, as for some reason, the UI here has changed on how my Chrome is being presented. No, I don't want that one. There we go. Okay, we don't have anything coming in from YouTube. But yeah, Richie, I wish I could give you more specific data than that. Again, for some reason, this is all updating so fast that these pages are just disappearing on me quite literally overnight. I had all of this stuff prepared last night. Ready to go last night. Unbelievably frustrating that half these links don't work from last night. So coronavirus, that's USA Facts. Let's do Connecticut deaths by age group. Cases and deaths by age group. Oh, here we go. Data updated 19. Okay. All right. We're going to do the Excel spreadsheet again. Here are the total deaths. Total deaths with COVID from 0 to 19 in Connecticut. 5 deaths. So let's do the same thing here. Okay. So that's actually really close to what we predicted. That's really, really, really close to what we predicted. Right? Okay, here we go. That's really close to what we predicted was 5 deaths. Right? So if there were 5 deaths this entire time period, and I wonder if we can get a more up-to-date. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so if we go back, let's do that June 1st. Why not? Let's see how long it takes us to get back. Again, this entire UI has been completely nuked since last night. I wish that wasn't the case. I do all this prep work the day beforehand, so I don't look like a fool, but I did anyways. Okay, so as of 6/1, the combined deaths were 4. 4. So we can go back into our Excel spreadsheet. That's how many days we've had since there. Okay, so deaths under 19 in Connecticut during those 111 days is, so it was 4, then it's 5 now. So in that 111 days, we've had 1 death. 1 death. So we can work that out to deaths by day. This divided by 111. That's a really small number. And then we have to multiply that equals this by times 365. Number of deaths per year in that age group divided by the number of people in that age group. Now, this is going to be inaccurate because this number is for under 18. But we can probably still come up with the same results. This divided by equals this divided by 736,000. Okay, now we're going to multiply. So we're going to do this. 1 divided by this. 223,000. 223,000. Yeah. So excluding the fact, if we're excluding the fact that we're probably off by tens of thousands of people in that 736,000 calculation because it's deaths under 19, not deaths under 18. One. And if that person was 19, if that person was 18, then they're not a death under 18. So we're basically right back to where we started here with that 221,000. Right. So 1 in several 100,000. That's what we're talking about. 1 in several 100,000. What level of risk are you willing to have your child be exposed to? Because by virtue of walking outside, there is a risk of them being struck by lightning. Are you allowing your kid to be struck by lightning? Are you allowing them to go outside without wearing, say, a lightning cage? Yes, you are. So there is a certain threshold of risk before you'll interfere with that threshold of risk, with that risk calculation. Obviously, just like we said with the waterboarding. That's why the waterboarding was in the thumbnail, because if your threshold of risk really is 0, then yeah, your 2-year-old should be wearing a mask while you're bathing them, because that's the thing that's going to help reduce the risk of them giving you COVID or them getting COVID from you, not knowing whether or not you have it, and because they can't get vaccinated right now legally, right? So Why aren't you waterboarding your 2-year-old if we're going to remain consistent on all this? So anyway, it looks like that's it for the questions for today. I would love to have a conversation about masks in town hall while we're having our town council meetings, because it seems to me to be utterly counterproductive, and I'll have to reserve that for another stream. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next week when we're going to talk about the American Rescue Plan Act funds, which you guys should be absolutely outraged about. So until then, this has been Mike, signing off. Good night, everybody.